They mocked her on the first day, until they discovered that she was the true owner of everything. Sarah Almeida walked into the sleek, glass-enclosed building with trepidation, her heart pounding in her chest. It was her first day at Eagle Tech, a leading technology company in the heart of the city, where she was hired as a systems analyst. Her excitement was palpable, but as she entered the pristine lobby, the cold, sterile walls seemed to reflect the chill creeping into her spine. She had worked hard to land this position, dreaming of climbing the corporate ladder and proving herself in a male-dominated field. However, she quickly realized that the reality was far harsher than she had anticipated. As Sarah waited at the reception desk, a few employees walked by, casting sideways glances at her, their whispers barely concealed. She felt an invisible barrier between herself and them, and though she tried to ignore it, the cold stares made her feel like an outsider. She had expected challenges, but she hadn't anticipated this feeling of being invisible. No one even bothered to greet her. Then came Victor, the man who unknowingly became the face of her struggles. He was tall, confident, and impeccably dressed in a suit that screamed success. He noticed Sarah, and with a slight smirk, gave her a nod, but nothing more. The look in his eyes made her feel like an intruder, like someone who didn't belong in this world. "Welcome to the team," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. As he turned to walk away, his group of friends, his followers she would soon come to learn, laughed under their breath. The low, mocking sound made Sarah's face flush with embarrassment, though she held her composure. Her mind raced with a million questions. What did she do wrong? Was she not good enough? She had barely stepped inside the office, and already she felt like she was failing. She followed her manager to her cubicle, the small, cramped space where she would spend her days. The others ignored her, some of them even making passive-aggressive remarks about her qualifications. She knew she had to prove herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they had already decided her worth without even giving her a chance. As the day dragged on, Sarah found herself in the middle of a technical issue, a minor glitch in the system but one that required urgent attention. She had been assigned to fix it, but as she sat in front of the monitor trying to solve the problem, the doubt crept in. Her hands trembled slightly and she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her. It was clear they didn't expect her to succeed. Victor's laughter echoed in her mind. Let's see how long she lasts. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to let their mockery break her. She was going to rise above it. With a deep breath, she focused on the problem at hand, ignoring the noise around her. But even as she typed away, the tension in the air was thick. Her heart pounded with each keystroke. Would she prove them wrong? Or would this be the day they'd finally have a reason to say, "I told you so"? And as the hours ticked by, she realized one thing. She was in for a much harder fight than she had imagined. But little did they know, Sarah had something none of them could foresee. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The next morning, Sarah walked through the same sleek lobby of Eagle Tech, but today the weight of her anxiety was heavier than the previous day. She had spent a sleepless night running through the technical issues she had fixed, and while part of her felt a glimmer of pride, she couldn't shake the doubt that lingered. Her colleagues hadn't even acknowledged her work. In fact, they hadn't acknowledged her at all. Sarah sat at her desk, her hands instinctively running over the keyboard, her mind still on the task. She could feel the eyes on her. Victor's voice had haunted her throughout the night, mocking her, questioning her abilities. Let's see how long she lasts. The day started off like any other, papers rustling, phones ringing, emails flooding in. She tried to keep her focus, but the office felt more like a battlefield than a workplace. Her mind kept drifting back to the looks and the whispers. It was only a matter of time before they figured out she wasn't one of them, that they were right about her. But then, as Sarah opened her inbox, she noticed something different. An email from Victor. Just 2 words. Meeting room. She froze for a moment, unsure of what it meant. Minutes later, she was walking toward the meeting room, her heart beating faster with each step. Was this her chance to prove herself? Or was it some sort of test? Another way for Victor to tear her down. When she entered, the room was filled with the familiar faces of her colleagues, the ones who had barely spared a glance at her since she arrived. And there, in the middle of the room, stood Victor, tall and confident as usual. His eyes locked onto hers as she entered, and for a brief moment, she felt a chill run down her spine. "Ah, Sarah," Victor said, his voice dripping with an almost theatrical warmth. "Glad you could join us." Sarah nodded, unsure of what to say, and took a seat at the end of the table, away from the others. "We were just talking about your work," Victor continued, his tone still light, but Sarah could sense the underlying tension. "I'm sure you've noticed how we value results around here, right?" The others glanced at each other, their eyes flickering to Sarah as if they were waiting for something. For a moment, she felt a lump rise in her throat, but she kept her face neutral, her gaze focused on Victor. "I've noticed," she replied, her voice steady though. Her palms were slick with sweat. "Good," Victor said with a smirk. "Because I think it's time you learn how things really work here. You're not in some cozy little tech support role anymore. This is Eagle Tech. You've got to keep up or you'll fall behind." There it was again. The condescension. The hidden challenge. He wasn't just talking about her work, he was talking about her place in the hierarchy. She was nothing more than a new recruit to him, someone he could push around with his words, a pawn in his game. Sarah bit back the urge to respond, to show him that she was more than just a face in the crowd. Instead, she remained silent, listening. Victor continued. "There's a new project coming up, a big one, the kind of thing that could make or break your career here. But trust me, it's not something you can just stumble your way into. I'm not sure if you're cut out for this, but..." He trailed off, looking around at his colleagues. The others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. "But I'll give you a chance," Victor finished. "You'll be working with me on this one. Just remember, this isn't a charity. You either pull your weight, or you'll be out." Sarah's breath caught in her chest. He was giving her a chance, but it felt more like a test she couldn't afford to fail. She had been thrown into a situation that could either make or break her, but something stirred inside her, a quiet resolve she hadn't recognized before. She wasn't going to let him crush her. Not again. She had been overlooked, humiliated, and underestimated for far too long. "Understood," Sarah replied, her voice firm now. "I'll prove myself." Victor's smirk deepened, as if he was amused by her confidence. "I'll be watching, Sarah. Let's see if you can keep up." With that, the meeting ended, and the weight of the moment settled over Sarah. But she couldn't allow herself to crumble under the pressure. The path ahead would be tough, but she was done being passive. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. Sarah sat in front of her desk, staring at the computer screen, feeling the weight of the task ahead of her. She was supposed to work with Victor on this major project, and her mind buzzed with uncertainty. It was her first real challenge at Eagle Tech, and there was no room for failure. Victor had given her no instructions, no clear direction, just the expectation that she would figure it out. The others had barely acknowledged her presence, and she could feel the coldness in the air whenever they glanced her way. It was as if she was invisible, a mere afterthought in a room filled with the self-assured and accomplished. She had been assigned a task to improve the efficiency of the company's software, something she had been trained for, but the pressure was mounting. With every passing minute, the feeling that she was an outsider grew stronger. Her colleagues barely spoke to her, and when they did, their words were either curt or wrapped in thinly veiled sarcasm. Sarah had never felt so isolated. She could almost hear the whispers behind her back, feel the judgment in their eyes. It wasn't just Victor anymore. It was the entire company that seemed to see her as insignificant. Pawn in a game they had already won. The office buzzed with activity, but Sarah remained in her small cubicle, surrounded by monitors and papers. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was sinking into the background, unnoticed and unimportant. She opened her email to check for updates but found only one. A request from Victor asking her to send him her progress report by the end of the day. Her stomach knotted. How was she supposed to create a report when she didn't even know where to begin? She could feel the walls closing in on her heart racing as the weight of the assignment pressed down on her shoulders. Desperation clawed at her, but she refused to let it show. She had made a promise to herself that she wouldn't let Victor see her weakness. She could do this. She had to. Sarah spent the next few hours in a haze of numbers and code, trying to make sense of the mess of data in front of her. The more she looked at it, the more confused she became. It wasn't that she didn't know what she was doing. It was just that everything seemed to fall short of what was expected of her. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, the pressure mounting with every second that passed. Then, just when she was about to give up, Camilla, the quiet woman from the finance department, appeared at her cubicle. "I saw you working on the report," Camilla said softly, her voice a welcome relief amidst the noise. "You look like you could use a hand." Sarah looked up, surprised but grateful. "I'm just stuck," she admitted, her voice low. "I don't know where to start and everything seems off. I don't think I can finish it by the deadline." Camilla gave a small, understanding smile. "I've been here for a while. If you want, I can help you organize your thoughts and give you some pointers." "We've all been there." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She couldn't do this on her own. Not anymore. Together, they spent the next hour working through the report. Camilla showed her how to simplify the data and focus on the key points that Victor would be looking for. The more they worked, the more confident Sarah became, and by the time they were finished, she felt a small spark of hope. "Thank you," Sarah said sincerely. "I couldn't have done it without you." Camilla smiled again, a warmth in her eyes. "You've got this. Don't let them get to you. You're better than they think." As Sarah watched Camilla leave her cubicle, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were people who understood, people who believed in her, even if the rest of the office didn't. And with that thought, she walked to Victor's office, report in hand, ready to face whatever came. Next, what do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. Sarah's heart pounded as she walked into Victor's office. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click, sealing her off from the rest of the office. The fluorescent lights above hummed quietly, casting a harsh glow on the sleek furniture. Victor sat behind his polished desk, his eyes trained on the computer screen in front of him, his posture exuding calm authority. Sarah's palms were sweaty as she approached his desk, holding the report in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed it down in front of him, trying her best to keep her composure. "Here's the progress report." "Victor," she said, her voice steady but betraying the nervousness she felt. Victor glanced up at her, his eyes narrowing as he picked up the report. His gaze flickered over it quickly, and for a moment Sarah felt exposed, as if she was being judged not just by him, but by the whole room. Her stomach twisted in knots. "You're lucky," Victor said with a smirk, not looking up from the report. "I wasn't expecting much, but you actually did something useful." Sarah's face flushed. She wasn't sure if he was being sarcastic or if he was genuinely giving her credit, but she wasn't about to let him get under her skin. "I did my best." Victor set the report down and leaned back in his chair, his hands folding in front of him as he studied her with a quiet intensity. "I suppose you did," he replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "But you're not here to just do your best. You're here to get results, real results." Sarah's nerves flared again. "That's what I'm trying to do," she said, forcing the words out. Victor stared at her for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, without warning, he slid the report across the desk toward her. "There's more to this than what you've written here," he said, his voice colder now. "You didn't even touch the most important part of the project, the one thing that's going to make a difference in our system." Sarah blinked, taken aback. I thought I covered everything." "You missed the core issue," Victor said, standing up from his chair. "And that's why I'm giving you this task. If you want to prove yourself, you'll need to fix it. And I mean now." Sarah's mind raced. She had worked tirelessly on this project, and the thought that she had missed something critical, something he hadn't even bothered to mention before, filled her with a sense of dread. How could she have overlooked something so important? Victor noticed the confusion in her eyes and let out a small chuckle, but it wasn't kind. "It's obvious, really. But you wouldn't understand it yet. Maybe that's why I gave you the easier parts of the task. You're not cut out for this." Sarah's heart sank. He was right about one thing. She didn't understand what he was talking about, but it was the last thing she needed to hear. His words stung like ice, and the anger she'd been trying to suppress bubbled to the surface. She had always been told she wasn't good enough. Now Victor was just another person telling her that her best wasn't enough. "Tell me what I missed," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the determination in her eyes was unmistakable. She wasn't going to let him walk all over her. Not this time. Victor leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "It's a security flaw in the system. You didn't see it, but I've known about it for a while. I just wanted to see if you'd figure it out on your own. So far? Nothing. You've just been wasting your time on the wrong things." Sarah's breath caught. A security flaw. How could she have missed that? "Do you want to keep your job?" Victor asked, his voice cold and mocking. "Fix it. Now." His words were like a slap to the face, but they also ignited something within her. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about showing him and everyone else that she could handle the responsibility. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. "I'll fix it," she said firmly, her eyes never leaving his. Victor raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He motioned toward the door, his dismissal clear. Sarah took one last look at him, her heart still pounding in her chest, but the fire in her belly was beginning to burn hotter. She was done being underestimated. She was done being invisible. As she walked back to her cubicle, her mind was already working, formulating a plan. She had to find this flaw. She had to fix it. And she would do it better than anyone ever expected. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Sarah. The task Victor had given her seemed insurmountable, but it also fueled something deep inside her. She wasn't going to let him be right. She couldn't afford to let this chance slip away. By the time the workday came to a close, Sarah sat in her cubicle, her eyes bleary from staring at the screen for hours. Her fingers were stiff from typing, but the clock on the wall seemed to taunt her. The system was complex. Too complex, perhaps. But Sarah couldn't give up. Not after everything she had already endured. Just when she felt the weight of exhaustion beginning to cloud her judgment, a soft voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. "You've been at this for hours," Camilla said, standing at the entrance of her cubicle. Her eyes held a look of concern, but also a glimmer of something else, something that almost resembled hope. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though the weariness in her voice betrayed her. "I've got to find this flaw in the system. If I don't, I'll never live it down." Camilla stepped closer, glancing over Sarah's shoulder at the screen. "I know it feels like a lot," she said, her tone gentle. "But maybe you're looking at it wrong." Sarah turned, surprised. "What do you mean?" You're focusing on the wrong variables, Camilla explained, taking a seat at the edge of Sarah's desk. The flaw isn't in the data. It's in the system's architecture, the way the layers communicate with each other. Sarah frowned, confused. It was just a security breach. It's a communication issue, Camilla corrected her softly. If you fix that, everything else will fall into place. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been so focused on what she thought was the problem, she hadn't even considered the structure of the system itself. It felt like a light bulb flicked on in her mind. This was the breakthrough she had been desperately searching for. How do you know this? Sarah asked, her voice a mix of awe and curiosity. I've worked in this department for years, Camilla said with a shrug. I've seen this happen before. It's an easy mistake to make, especially when you're new. But I've also seen how important it is to support each other around here. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Camilla, the quiet, reserved woman who had barely spoken to anyone before, was now offering her guidance that could make or break Sarah's career at Eagle Tech. But why? Why was Camilla helping her when it seemed like no one else cared? Thank you, Sarah said quietly, her voice thick with gratitude. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Camilla replied, giving her a warm smile. I just don't want to see you get lost in the shuffle. We all need to stick together here, even if the others don't realize it. Sarah nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't alone anymore. She had an ally, a real one. Not someone who was trying to bring her down or test her, but someone who genuinely wanted to see her succeed. With Camilla's guidance, Sarah began to rework the system. It was a painstaking process, but it felt like everything was starting to fall into place. The puzzle pieces were aligning, and for the first time since she had walked into Eagle Tech, Sarah felt like she might actually be able to pull this off. Hours passed in a blur as they worked side by side. The sun had long since set, and the office had quieted down. The hum of the machines around them was the only sound, but Sarah no longer felt like she was fighting a losing battle. With each new step, she could see the fix coming together. Finally, as the clock ticked past midnight, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her tired eyes scanning the final version of the solution. I think I've got it, she said, barely believing her own words. She looked up at Camilla, who was still seated beside her, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. I really think I've got it. Camilla smiled, her eyes proud. I knew you could do it. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. She wasn't just a newcomer anymore. She had a purpose, and now she had a chance to prove it to. Everyone who had doubted her, especially Victor. Thanks, Camilla, Sarah said quietly. I don't think I could have done it without you. You could have, Camilla replied with a wink. You just needed a little nudge. With a sigh of relief, Sarah shut down her computer and gathered her things. She wasn't going to let Victor see how much he had affected her. She was going to walk into that office with confidence, knowing that she had earned her place here. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. Sarah sat in her cubicle the following morning, staring at the freshly printed report she had meticulously crafted with Camilla's help. It was flawless. Every detail accounted for. The security flaw was fixed. The system was stable, faster, and more secure than it had been in weeks. The hours she had spent in the office alone with her thoughts had brought clarity. She had poured her heart into the work, determined to prove herself, and now it was time to show Victor and the team the results. But as Sarah glanced around the office, a storm of doubt began to swirl in her chest. She was still new. Here, still just a name on a desk to most of the people she worked with. She had been told time and again that she didn't belong. Victor's words echoed in her mind. You're not cut out for this. You're just another rookie. The words cut deep. She had worked hard to make it this far, but she wasn't sure how much longer she could endure the cold shoulders and veiled insults. It wasn't just about fixing a system anymore. It was about proving that she belonged here, that she wasn't the weak link in a company that could easily swallow her whole. Victor had made it clear that failure wasn't an option. He hadn't given her the benefit of the doubt. But now, with the solution in front of her, it felt like the pressure was mounting. What if they found a flaw? What if they found out she wasn't as perfect as she had hoped? Her thoughts spiraled, and Sarah found herself second-guessing everything she had done. Was she ready to face the inevitable scrutiny? The quiet whispers behind her back? Was she strong enough to stand up to Victor and the entire office, or would she crumble under the weight of their expectations? The door to her cubicle opened, and Camilla stepped inside, her expression thoughtful. "Hey," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "You look like you're about to crack." Sarah took a deep breath, not sure if she was ready to admit how much the pressure was getting to her. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking. You don't have to carry it all on. Your own," Camilla said gently, sitting down beside her. "You've done the work. You fixed it. You can't keep questioning yourself like this." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice faltering slightly. "But it's not just about the code. It's about everything else. About proving to them that I'm not just some newbie who's in over her head. I have to show them I'm worth it." Camilla looked at her with understanding in her eyes. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone except yourself. Don't let them tell you who you are. You already know what you're capable of." Sarah swallowed hard, her emotions a tangled mess inside her. She was tired of fighting for respect, tired of feeling like she was invisible, tired of wondering if she would ever truly belong. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Sarah admitted, her voice cracking. "What if they're right? What if I'm not enough?" Camilla's expression softened, and she put a reassuring hand on Sarah's. "That's the fear talking, the doubt. It's normal. But you're more than enough. You're smarter than most of them here, and you know it. Don't let their insecurities make you question yours." Sarah looked down at the report in her hands for a moment. She didn't know what to think. Could she really face Victor, knowing how hard she had fought to get to this point? Could she hold her head high, knowing that there was always a chance they would dismiss her work because of who she was, or how they viewed her? Camilla's words echoed in her mind. "You're smarter than most of them here, and you know it." She had to believe that. She had to believe in herself. "Thanks, Camilla," Sarah whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Don't thank me," Camilla replied softly. "Thank yourself. You've earned this." With those words, a strange sense of peace settled over Sarah. It wasn't that the fear was gone, or that the doubts had evaporated. It was just that, for the first time since she'd stepped into this office, she realized that she didn't need to prove herself to anyone but herself. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stood up and walked toward Victor's office, report in hand. She wasn't walking with the weight of her fears on her shoulders anymore. She was walking with the knowledge that no matter what happened, she had done her best. And that was enough. As she knocked on the door and entered, Victor looked up from his desk, his eyes assessing as always. "You got it?" he asked, his voice cool, indifferent. Sarah nodded, her heart beating steady in her chest. "I did. I found the issue. I fixed it." Victor didn't smile, didn't congratulate her. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "Let's see if it holds up," he said, his voice low and calculating. He turned to the monitor, clicking a few keys to begin testing the system. The silence between them was thick, but Sarah held her ground, her gaze steady. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. Not really. Minutes passed. Victor's eyes flicked back and forth between the code and the screen, his expression unreadable. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Looks like you did your job," he said, his voice lacking any real emotion. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or just another test. But it didn't matter. She had done it. She had proved to herself, if not to him, that she could handle this. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll keep working to make sure it doesn't happen again." Victor barely acknowledged her response as he turned back to his work. But Sarah didn't need his approval. She had earned her place here, and no one, least of all him, could take that away from her. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned. For more exciting stories, feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease as she returned to her cubicle. Victor's praise had been as cold as ever, but the relief she felt from having solved the issue was bittersweet. She had proven herself, at least to herself, but the path ahead still seemed laden with obstacles. The office wasn't just a place to work. It was a battlefield where she was forced to fight for every ounce of respect, every small acknowledgement. She had won one battle, but the war was far from over. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself caught in the relentless rhythm of office life. Her colleagues were still distant, their whispers and glances lingering just out of earshot. She didn't know whether they were still skeptical of her, or if they were simply too caught up in their own work to care. Either way, the isolation remained. But there was something else now, something new in the air. Victor's presence loomed over her even when he wasn't around. She could feel his eyes on her whenever she passed by, his judgment hanging like a cloud. He might have acknowledged her work, but that didn't mean he was done testing her. She knew he'd be watching her every move, waiting for the smallest misstep. And if she failed again, if she let him see any sign of weakness, it would be all over. But Sarah was determined to stay strong. She couldn't afford to be distracted by fear anymore. She had come too far, learned too much to back down now. That afternoon, as Sarah was working on a new project, she received a message from Camilla. It was short and to the point. "Victor's planning a big presentation next week. It's a make-or-break project. He's going to want to see what you've got." Sarah's heart skipped. A presentation. That meant she would have to face not just Victor, but the entire team. She would have to stand before everyone who had mocked her, underestimated her, and prove that she was capable of something more than just following orders. A surge of anxiety washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a spark of defiance. She had faced worse than this before. Every setback, every whisper had only made her stronger. The thought of giving up now, of letting Victor and the others win, was unthinkable. That evening, as the office slowly emptied and the city outside darkened, Sarah remained at her desk. The hum of the air conditioning and the soft clink of keyboards was the only sound in the otherwise empty office. She could feel the weight of the presentation looming ahead of her, but it wasn't just about the project. It was about showing everyone, especially Victor, that she belonged here. Sarah worked late into the night, her focus unwavering. Every detail mattered. Every line of code, every statistic. She had learned enough in her short time at EagleTech to know that perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded. She couldn't afford a single mistake. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, fatigue began to set in. Her eyes blurred, her head throbbed. The screen in front of her seemed to mock her, every number and line of code a reminder of the pressure she was under. She took a deep breath, running her fingers through her hair, trying to steady herself. She had to keep going. And then, just as she was about to dive back into her work, a shadow fell over her desk. She looked up, startled to find Victor standing in front of her, his figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the office lights. "I thought you might still be here," he said, his voice cool and calculated. "Working late, are we?" Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I have a lot to prepare for the presentation." Victor took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at her screen. "You know, the higher-ups are going to be watching next week. This isn't just about you impressing me. This is about proving your worth to the entire company." Sarah's stomach twisted. "I'm aware." Victor studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "You know, I've been thinking, you've got potential, but potential isn't enough. You'll need to go beyond what you think you're capable of. Push yourself harder." Sarah met his gaze, holding her ground. "I'm doing my best." Victor's lips curled into a small smirk. "Your best is not enough yet, but maybe it will be." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused and looked back at her, his eyes gleaming with something almost like amusement. "Just don't forget, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "I'm watching you." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Sarah in the silence of the office once again. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about her survival in this place. Victor had made it clear that this wasn't just a test of skill. It was a test of strength, of resilience, of the will to stand up to everything and everyone who had ever doubted her. And Sarah was determined not to fail. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The day of the presentation arrived faster than Sarah anticipated. The pressure had been building for weeks, and now everything came down to this one moment. The entire office was abuzz with anticipation, and Victor had made it clear that he expected nothing less than perfection. The room was already filled with executives, senior staff, and a few members of the tech team. All eyes would be on Sarah. As Sarah stood outside the conference room, her palms sweaty and her mind racing, she tried to steady her breath. Her heart hammered in her chest, every beat a reminder of how much was riding on this. She had worked tirelessly, putting in hours that bled into the early mornings. Her hands had bled from typing, her eyes strained from staring at the screen for too long. She had pushed herself beyond her limits, and she knew that if she failed today, it would be over. The whispers, the mockery, the doubts, they would all become reality. And worse, it would be Victor who would have the final word. She took one last breath and walked into the room. Victor was already there, standing at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back as he scanned the room with a commanding presence. He glanced over at her with a brief nod, but his eyes betrayed nothing. No sign of approval, no acknowledgement of her efforts. He was, as always, a mystery. "Everyone, let's get started," Victor announced, his voice calm but carrying an air of authority. "Sarah, you're up first. Let's see what you've got." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she clicked through her slides. The data was flawless, the presentation tight and clear. She spoke with confidence, her voice steady as she highlighted the key points. She explained how she had fixed the system's security flaw, improved efficiency, and added features that would benefit the company long-term. She could feel the weight of the room on her shoulders, each person watching her, analyzing her every word, every gesture. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but she pushed through, focusing on the slides. And then it happened. The moment she had been dreading, the moment that would test everything she had worked for. As Sarah clicked to the final slide, her screen froze. Panic shot through her chest. She clicked the mouse again, harder this time, but nothing happened. The room, which had been silent, was suddenly alive with murmurs. Sarah's heart raced. She hadn't prepared for this. The program was supposed to work. She had tested it. She had made sure everything was perfect. Why was it malfunctioning now? Victor's voice cut through the room, sharp and clinical. "It seems we have a problem. Sarah, is this a mistake you didn't account for?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the eyes of the room turning on her, watching for her reaction. The pressure felt unbearable, like a weight was pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. She glanced at the screen, her mind spinning. She had tested everything. Why was it failing now? I'm not sure," she stammered, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. It was working earlier. I don't know why it's freezing now. Victor raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing. This is unprofessional. You didn't double-check your work? Sarah swallowed hard. I did. I don't know what's happening. The murmurs in the room grew louder, and Sarah could hear the skepticism in their voices. She could see their faces, some indifferent, others disappointed. But there was one face that stood out. Camila. She was sitting in the back, her eyes locked on Sarah with a look of concern. Camila had always been her ally, the one person who had believed in her when no one else did. But now Sarah wasn't sure if anyone could help her fix this. Victor took a step forward, his tone dripping with disappointment. This isn't good enough. If you can't handle the simplest aspects of the presentation, how can I trust you with the big tasks? You've had plenty of time to prepare. I expected more from you. Sarah's chest tightened as his words echoed in her mind. She had given everything to this presentation. Everything. And now, it was slipping through her fingers. Can you fix it? Victor asked coldly, his eyes never leaving her. Sarah's mind was spinning, her thoughts a blur. She wanted to scream, to run away, but she couldn't. Not here, not now. She had to fix this. She had no choice. I can fix it, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. She turned away from the screen, her fingers trembling as she clicked through the options. But with every attempt to restart the program, the failure only seemed to deepen. She was running out of time, and the room was growing more uncomfortable by the second. As the minutes dragged on, the realization began to sink in. She wasn't going to be able to fix this in time. She had failed. And it wasn't just the program. It was everything. Victor's voice broke through her thoughts once again. This is a waste of time. You had your chance. I suggest you go back to your desk and figure this out on your own without wasting any more of everyone's time. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She could feel her body freeze, the weight of defeat settling over her. She had failed. There was no other way to put it. And as she turned to leave the room, her face burning with shame, she could hear the low murmur of the others, their whispers like daggers in the air. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but it felt like a prison. Her shoulders slumped as she walked back to her cubicle, every step heavy with the knowledge that she had lost her chance. She had let them down. And worse, she had let herself down. When Sarah reached her desk, she slumped into her chair, her mind racing with thoughts of failure and regret. She had come so far, fought so hard to get to this point, and now, everything felt like it was slipping away. She had tried her best, but it wasn't enough. It never seemed to be. And in that moment, with the weight of the day bearing down on her, Sarah realized something. Victor wasn't just her boss. He was a symbol of everything she had been fighting against. The doubt, the criticism, the constant need to prove herself. But maybe it was time to stop fighting against him and start fighting for herself. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The hours after the failed presentation seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah could barely bring herself to focus on anything other than the images of disappointment that still haunted her thoughts. The faces of her colleagues, some of whom had barely known her name just weeks ago, now looked at her with pity, skepticism, or worse, indifference. Victor's cutting words echoed in her mind. This isn't good enough. Those words, once just part of the background noise of her life, now felt like a permanent fixture in her thoughts. A constant reminder that she had failed in the most public way possible. As the day wore on, Sarah retreated further into her cubicle. She couldn't face anyone, not Victor, not the others. Her confidence, once so carefully built, had been shattered in front of everyone. All the progress she thought she'd made felt like it had been wiped away in an instant. Even Camilla, who had been her ally through this difficult journey, was avoiding her. Every time Sarah looked over, Camilla was busy with something else, her eyes flicking away quickly whenever their gazes met. Sarah couldn't blame her. She had failed, and now everyone was afraid of being associated with her. Failure. Her cubicle felt more like a prison than ever before, the walls closing in on her as she stared blankly at the screen, unable to focus. The words, "You're not cut out for this," played over and over in her mind. The longer she sat there, the heavier the isolation became. It was a weight she hadn't felt before, a sense of being alone in a room full of people, of being a failure in a company that had no room for weakness. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Sarah stared at the screen, willing herself to pick it up, but she couldn't make herself do it. She didn't want to talk to anyone. Not now. Her heart was heavy, and every passing minute seemed to drag her further into despair. What was the point in continuing? She had tried so hard to be more than just a placeholder in the office, but the harder she tried, the more it felt like she was just one mistake away from being tossed aside. The office was beginning to empty out as the day came to an end. Most of her colleagues were leaving, chatting and laughing among themselves. Sarah sat in her cubicle, the emptiness around her amplifying the loneliness she felt inside. She wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there when Camilla finally approached, her steps tentative, like she wasn't sure if Sarah wanted company. Camilla stopped a few feet away, her voice quiet. "Sarah?" Sarah looked up, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything. She didn't have the energy to explain herself, to justify the failure that had become her reality. Camilla hesitated before sitting down beside her, her voice soft. "Hey, I know today didn't go the way you wanted, but you have to understand something. This doesn't define you. This one failure doesn't change everything you've worked for." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of Camilla, who had been her one source of support through all of this. But the pain of disappointment, of feeling like she wasn't enough, was too much to hide. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Every time I try, it feels like I'm one step away from messing everything up. I'm not cut out for this, Camilla." Camilla placed a hand on Sarah's arm, a steadying presence. "You are cut out for this. Don't listen to the voices telling you otherwise. You've made it this far. You're talented. You've got the skills, but more than that, you've got the drive. The only thing stopping you right now is your fear of failure. You've got to stop letting that fear control you." Sarah shook her head, the words weighing heavily on her heart. "But I've already failed in front of everyone. They're all going to think I'm a fraud now. How am I supposed to face them tomorrow?" Camilla's gaze softened, and she took a deep breath before responding. "Failure isn't the end. It's just a setback. It doesn't define who you are. I know it feels like everything's falling apart right now, but you can bounce back. People are going to forget this presentation soon enough. What will matter is how you respond." "But I can't even get the basics right," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was ready, but I'm not. Maybe I'm not meant to be here." Camilla looked at her, her eyes fierce with determination. "You don't get to decide that for yourself. You've come this far. You're here for a reason. Don't let this one mistake convince you that you're not worthy of success. I know you, and I believe in you." Sarah let out a shaky breath. She wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was more for her at Eagle Tech, but the road ahead felt so uncertain. The fear that had been gnawing at her for weeks, the fear that she would never be able to measure up, that she would always be the one who didn't belong, was now suffocating her. "I don't know if I can trust myself anymore," Sarah admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. Camilla's voice was firm but kind. "Trust me when I say this. You are more than this. You're not going to be remembered for this failure. You're going to be remembered for how you rise from it." Sarah looked at her friend, the words sinking in slowly. She didn't have the answers yet, didn't know how to make the pain of failure go away, But for the first time since the presentation, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Camilla was right. Maybe this wasn't the end. With a small, hesitant nod, Sarah stood up, a sense of determination slowly filling her chest. She might not have all the answers, but she wasn't going to let one failure define her. Not anymore. Tomorrow was a new day, and she was going to show them all, starting with herself, that she wasn't done fighting. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. Sarah's resolve strengthened as she sat in her cubicle the following day. The weight of yesterday's failure still heavy on her shoulders, but no longer suffocating. The echoes of Victor's disappointment had faded slightly, replaced by the quiet but firm voice of Camilla, encouraging her to rise above the noise. You're more than this. The office hummed with the typical morning chaos, phones ringing, people walking past her, laughter in the distance. Sarah tried her best to block out the whispers and focus on her work. She had a decision to make. She couldn't afford to let this failure define her. She would have to prove herself all over again. This time, not just to Victor, but to herself. As she stared at her screen, trying to push through her lingering doubt, a familiar face appeared at the edge of her cubicle. It was Jacob, a senior engineer who worked across the hall from her. He was well respected in the office, known for his quiet brilliance and unassuming demeanor. Sarah had always admired him from afar, but they had never really spoken. "Hey, Sarah," Jacob greeted her, his voice warm and inviting, unlike the cold professionalism she had grown used to. "Do you have a minute?" Sarah looked up, surprised. Jacob was one of the few people who hadn't looked at her with pity or distaste. In fact, he had never made her feel invisible. "Sure," she replied, sitting up straighter. "What's up?" He stepped inside her cubicle, lowering his voice so they wouldn't be overheard. "I heard about the presentation yesterday." He paused as if choosing his words carefully. "I just wanted to say, don't let it get to you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You heard about it?" "Everyone did," Jacob said with a half smile. "But look, I've been here long enough to know that things don't always go as planned. I've had my share of mess-ups. It happens." Sarah felt a flicker of something. Relief, maybe? She had never expected anyone to reach out to her, especially not Jacob. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft. It felt like everything I worked for up until that moment didn't matter." Jacob leaned against the edge of her desk, crossing his arms. "It doesn't feel good, but it doesn't define you. What matters now is how you handle it. I know you're capable, Sarah. I've seen the work you've done. Don't let one mistake make you doubt yourself." His words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to argue, to say that she had messed up too badly to recover, but Jacob's steady gaze stopped her. He wasn't just being polite. He genuinely believed in her. "I'm not sure I can keep up with Victor's expectations," Sarah admitted quietly. "I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough." Jacob's expression softened. "Victor pushes people hard. Maybe too hard sometimes. But that's on him, not you. If you need help, don't hesitate to ask. We're all here for each other. Don't let his pressure make you forget what you're capable of." Sarah met his gaze, her heart racing. The support, the offer of help, it was so simple, but it felt like a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks, Jacob. I mean it." Jacob gave her an encouraging nod. "Anytime, Sarah. You've got this." As he walked away, Sarah sat back in her chair, a sense of warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that she wasn't as alone as she'd felt. The cold, competitive atmosphere of Eagletech didn't have to define her experience here. There were people, like Camilla and now Jacob, who cared, who saw her for more than just the failures. She wasn't invisible anymore. With a new sense of clarity, Sarah turned back to her screen. There was still work to be done. The project wasn't going to fix itself, and Victor's approval wasn't going to come easily, but she had something now, a quiet, growing confidence that had been lacking for so long. She opened up her files and began working, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. There was a lot of work ahead, but she was no longer afraid of failing. She had already done that, and she had survived. As the hours passed, Sarah's mind remained focused. She was determined to make up for her previous mistakes. She wasn't going to let Victor or anyone else dictate her worth anymore. She was going to prove that she belonged here, not by seeking approval, but by doing the work. And as the day began to wind down, Sarah made a promise to herself. No matter what happened next, she wouldn't let the past define her. The future was waiting, and it was hers for the taking. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. It had been a week since the failed presentation, and Sarah had spent every waking moment trying to prove to herself that she was capable. She buried herself in work, focusing on fixing the issues with the system, improving the efficiency, and ensuring that the new features would work flawlessly. She was determined that the next time her work was evaluated, there would be no room for doubt. Victor had been unusually quiet since the presentation. Sarah couldn't decide if that was a good thing or a bad thing. It was hard to interpret his silence. After all, he never seemed to say much unless it was criticism. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't desperate for his approval anymore. She was doing this for herself now, not for him. The tension in the office had died down somewhat. Sarah noticed her colleagues were beginning to pay more attention to her work, though they still kept their distance. Camilla, however, had been a constant support. They exchanged quiet words of encouragement, and Sarah found comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. Today, though, something felt different. Sarah had been working on a new feature for the company's software, one that could optimize workflows for the entire team. She was in her cubicle concentrating hard when the door to her space opened without warning. It was Victor. Sarah froze, unsure whether she should even acknowledge his presence. The tension from their last encounter still hung between them, but this time, she didn't feel the same sinking dread. If anything, she felt a small sense of determination rising inside her. "I need you to come to my office," Victor said curtly. "Now." Sarah's stomach tightened, but she stood up, pushing her chair back. "Of course." She walked beside him as they made their way down the hallway. She couldn't help but wonder what was coming. Had he come to tell her that her efforts weren't enough again? That she had failed? But when they arrived at Victor's office, he motioned for her to sit. His expression was unreadable. "I've been reviewing your work," Victor began. "Your last project had issues, but it wasn't entirely your fault. The system was more complicated than we realized." Sarah's heart skipped. Was he admitting that the failure wasn't all on her? Or was he about to rip her work apart? "I've decided to give you a second chance," he continued, his voice colder than usual. "But you need to understand something, Sarah. If you can't prove yourself this time, there won't be another opportunity." Sarah held his gaze, but the words didn't sting the way they used to. She had made up her mind long ago. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "I'll make sure I prove it." Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. I've set up a meeting with the higher-ups next week. You'll be presenting your progress. Make sure it's flawless." Sarah stood up, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. She wasn't afraid of the challenge. In fact, she welcomed it. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She could do this. And this time, she would prove that she wasn't just some rookie. Later that evening, as Sarah worked late, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, but she had learned more about herself than she had ever expected. She had started this job terrified, feeling like an outsider, unsure of her place in a world full of people who seemed to know everything already. Now, she was starting to feel like she belonged. Her phone buzzed and she saw that it was a message from Camilla. "I heard what happened. You got this, Sarah. I know you do." Sarah smiled at the message, her heart swelling with appreciation. She had been so focused on proving herself to others that she hadn't realized how much support she had around her. It wasn't just about the work. It was about the people who were with her every step of the way. With renewed determination, Sarah continued working through the night. She was ready for whatever Victor or anyone else threw at her. This time, she would take the stage with confidence. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The days leading up to the presentation were a whirlwind. Sarah's mind raced with ideas, tweaks, and adjustments as she worked tirelessly to prepare. Every moment felt crucial, and she couldn't afford a single misstep. She had seen the way Victor's eyes narrowed when he spoke of her failure last time. She wouldn't let him see that kind of disappointment again. But as the day of the big meeting drew nearer, a nagging feeling tugged at her gut. Something was off. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the constant whisper in her ear that no matter how hard she worked, it might not be enough. Still, she pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. The night before the presentation, Sarah stayed late again, reviewing the final details of her work. She could feel her exhaustion creeping in, but the need to be perfect kept her glued to the screen. Around midnight, when the office had quieted down and most of her colleagues had gone home, she got an unexpected visitor. Camilla. Sarah looked up, her eyes bleary but thankful for the interruption. "Hey, you're still here?" she asked, offering a tired smile. Camilla stepped inside the cubicle, her expression serious. "Yeah, I figured you'd still be working. How's it going?" "I'm almost done," Sarah said, her voice trailing off. I'm not sure. There's so much riding on this, Camilla. I feel like I can't get it perfect and I don't know how to make sure I'm not missing anything." Camilla gave her a small, understanding smile. "You've got this, Sarah. You've done the work. Just take a breath, you'll do fine." Sarah smiled weakly, but deep down, the unease still lingered. "Thanks. I hope so." Just then, the office door opened and Victor appeared in the doorway. His presence immediately filled the space. With tension, his sharp eyes scanning the room before landing on Sarah. "Still here, I see," he said, his tone flat. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Sarah's stomach twisted. He hadn't said anything about her work, which was strange. Usually he couldn't resist pointing out every flaw, every imperfection. But today he said nothing. It was as if he were waiting for something that Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on. "I'll get some sleep soon," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor walked into the cubicle, his steps deliberate and casually. Glanced at Sarah's screen. "I assume everything's in order," he said with a raised eyebrow. Sarah nodded, her anxiety creeping back. "Yes, everything's set." Victor's eyes lingered on the screen for a moment before he turned to leave. "Good," he said over his shoulder. "Don't screw this up tomorrow." The door clicked shut behind him, and Sarah's heart sank. She had seen the look in his eyes, something cold and calculating. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. What was he up to? Before she could dwell on it any longer, Camilla spoke, her voice tinged with concern. He's acting strange, don't you think?" Sarah met her gaze. "I don't know, it's like he's waiting for something." "Be careful," Camilla warned, her tone dropping. "Victor's not the kind of person who leaves things to chance. You're not the only one he's been watching." Sarah frowned, unsure of what Camilla meant. But before she could ask, Camilla turned and walked away, leaving Sarah with a sinking feeling in her chest. The next morning arrived with a sense of urgency in the air. Sarah arrived at the conference room early, her heart racing as she set up her laptop for the presentation. The room was filled with senior staff, all waiting expectantly for her to begin. She stood before them, her hands slightly trembling, but her focus was sharp. This was her moment. She had come so far, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. As she walked through her slides, explaining the updates and improvements, she could feel the tension in the room. Victor sat at the front, his eyes narrowed, watching her every move. His silence was deafening. When Sarah reached the final slide, a summary of the new feature she had been working on, she paused. Her mind raced. Everything was in place. Everything was perfect, or so she thought. The moment she clicked to the next slide, her laptop froze. The room fell silent as the screen went black. Panic surged through her veins. She hit the keys, desperate to restart the presentation, but nothing happened. The audience stirred, whispers circulating the room. Victor's face was unreadable, but Sarah could feel his gaze on her like a weight. "Is this part of the presentation?" one of the executives asked, his voice laced with mockery. Sarah felt the heat rise to her cheeks, the coldness of dread washing over her. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. The failure she had been so desperately trying to avoid was happening in real time, right in front of her. She had done everything. She had worked so hard. And now, it was falling apart. In the chaos of the moment, Sarah turned to look at her laptop again, hoping against hope that it would respond. But then something caught her eye. A folder that wasn't hers. It was a file in the corner of her desktop that she had never seen before. It wasn't part of her presentation. It wasn't part of the work she had put together. A sickening realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. Someone had tampered with her work. Someone had set her up to fail. Her gaze shot toward Victor, but he wasn't looking at her. Instead, his eyes were focused on the screen, watching her struggle. Her heart pounded in her chest. Camilla was right. And then it hit her. The true betrayal. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as she stared at the mysterious folder that had appeared on her screen. The weight of the moment was too much to process. Her laptop had frozen in front of the whole team, the executives waiting, their eyes filled with suspicion. But now, with this strange folder looming over her, the fear of failure was replaced by something darker. She couldn't let this go unnoticed. Someone had tampered with her work, and she had to figure out who and why. Her heart raced in her chest as she clicked on the folder, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The file wasn't named anything she recognized, just a random string of letters and numbers. But when she opened it, her stomach dropped. It was a log of changes to her presentation, alterations to the code and the data she had worked so hard to perfect. Someone had gone in and changed her work, adding errors and glitches that would make her look incompetent in front of everyone. Sarah's hands shook as she read through the file, her blood running cold. It wasn't just a few minor adjustments. It was deliberate sabotage. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Victor, it had to be him. No one else, no one, had the access or the motivation to do this. He had set her up to fail. All the criticism he had piled on her, the cold stares, the subtle jabs, it all made sense now. He hadn't been testing her. He had been toying with her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Victor wanted to break her. He wanted her to fail, and this was how he planned to do it. Sarah's mind raced. She had to fix this. She had to fix everything. There was no time to waste. The room was still silent, the executives waiting for her to speak, to explain why the presentation had gone wrong. But she couldn't speak, not yet. She needed to gather her thoughts. She needed to find a way to prove her innocence, to expose the sabotage for what it was. She clicked quickly through the system logs, praying that there was a way to trace the changes, to pinpoint when they had been made and who had made them. Then, just as she was about to lose hope, she saw it. There was a timestamp. The changes had been made the night before the presentation, right when she had been sitting at her desk, reviewing the final details of her work. That was when Victor had been in her cubicle, just before Camilla had come in. It wasn't just coincidence. Without thinking, Sarah stood up, facing the room full of executives, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "I need to explain what's happened here," she said, her gaze flicking to Victor, who sat quietly in the front of the room, watching her with an almost imperceptible smile. "Before we go any further, I want to show you something," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "What happened with the presentation wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage. Someone tampered with my work, and I can prove it." The room erupted in murmurs as Sarah quickly opened the logs and showed the executives the changes made to her files. She pointed to the timestamps, explaining how the alterations had been made after hours, when no one else had been in the office except for her and Victor. Victor's face remained calm, but his eyes narrowed. He was caught, and he knew it. But he wasn't going to give up that easily. "You're making a mistake," Victor said coolly, his voice dripping with venom. "This is all a misunderstanding. You've been working under a lot of pressure, Sarah. Maybe you've confused things in your rush to finish." Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't back down. "No, Victor. I haven't confused anything. You've been playing games with me from the start. You've been setting me up to fail. And now I'm exposing the truth." Victor's calm facade cracked, his eyes flashing with anger. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You think this is some game? You think I've been trying to break you? You're nothing but a liability." The room fell silent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized that Victor wasn't going to admit to anything. But she had him now. She had the proof. He couldn't talk his way out of this one. The executives stood up one by one, murmuring among themselves. The tension in the room was thick, and for a moment, no one spoke. But then, one of the senior executives, David, spoke up, his voice measured, but firm. "This is serious," David said, his eyes flicking between Sarah and Victor. "We'll need to investigate further, but Sarah, you've presented clear evidence. This is not something we can ignore." Victor's face paled as he realized the gravity of the situation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Victor," David said, his tone cold, "I think it's time for you to step out of the room." The room was silent as Victor stood frozen, his anger simmering just below the surface. But slowly, his shoulders slumped, and he turned, walking out of the room without another word. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, overwhelming exhaustion. The battle wasn't over, not yet. But she had won this round. As she turned back to face the executives, Sarah realized something. She had done it. She had taken control. And for the first time in months, she felt like she was on the right path. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. Sarah stood at the front of the room, her heart still pounding in her chest after the confrontation. The door had just closed behind Victor, and a thick silence hung in the air. The executives sat still, their eyes on her, the tension in the room palpable. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had finally done it. She had uncovered the truth. David, the senior executive who had spoken earlier, leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. His gaze was steady, unwavering as he studied Sarah. "You've made a very serious accusation," David said, his voice firm but not unkind. "And it's clear that you've presented a compelling case. But we need to proceed carefully. This isn't just about Victor anymore. It's about the integrity of this entire company." Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. This wasn't over yet. She had exposed the sabotage, but the investigation was just beginning. Victor was going to fight back, and she knew it. The executives were already starting to murmur among themselves, discussing the situation. But something in Sarah had changed. She wasn't going to back down. She had spent too long being afraid, doubting herself, letting people like Victor make her feel small. Now she was standing tall, ready to fight for her place, for her dignity. She wasn't going to let him destroy her anymore. "I understand," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But the truth is, I've worked harder than anyone here to prove myself. I've been given no room for mistakes. And yet when I'm sabotaged, I'm the one who is expected to fail quietly. I'm not going to let that happen." David regarded her carefully. "You've shown us your evidence. We'll have to review everything. But I need you to understand. This will take time. We have to make sure everything is documented properly." Sarah nodded. She wasn't asking for immediate results. She knew that this would be a long road, and she was prepared to walk it. But she wasn't going to let Victor's manipulation go unchecked. Not this time. "We'll look into it," David continued. "Victor is a key player in this company. This won't be easy, but we'll do our due diligence." As the meeting came to a close, Sarah felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief wash over her. The worst had passed. She had confronted Victor, and the truth was out. Now it was time to wait. When Sarah left the conference room, the hallway felt unusually quiet. She didn't feel like celebrating. The confrontation had been a necessary step, but there was still work to be done. She still had to prove that she was worthy of being here, that she wasn't just someone who had been given a chance by accident. She had earned her place. Days passed, and the investigation into Victor's actions unfolded slowly. Sarah continued to work, but the atmosphere in the office had shifted. There was still some distance between her and her colleagues, but things were different now. People were starting to acknowledge her, to respect her. They had seen what she was capable of, even if it had come at a steep price. The whispers that had once followed her every move had quieted, and instead, there were nods of approval, brief but sincere smiles. Camilla remained by her side, offering quiet support whenever Sarah needed it. But Victor, meanwhile, had disappeared. No one spoke of him much, but Sarah could feel the tension when his name came up in passing conversations. It was clear that whatever had happened, whatever the investigation uncovered, had rocked the foundation of Eagle Tech. It wasn't just about one man's actions anymore. It was about the culture he had fostered, the toxic environment he had helped create. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sarah received an unexpected message. It was from David, the senior executive. "Can you meet with me tomorrow morning? I have something important to discuss." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. It had been days since the confrontation, and she had been holding her breath, waiting for the final verdict. She didn't know what to expect, whether the investigation had turned up more than she had realized, or if it had all come to a close. The next morning, Sarah walked to David's office, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She was prepared for anything, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. David greeted her with a somber smile and motioned for her to sit. "Sarah," he began, his voice measured, "we've concluded our investigation, and I want you to know that the evidence was clear. Victor's actions were not only unethical but detrimental to the company's values." Sarah's breath caught. She didn't know what she had expected, but hearing it confirmed felt surreal. She had been right all along. "We've made the decision to terminate Victor's employment with Eagle Tech," David continued. "But there's something else we need to address, something I need to make clear." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What is it?" David leaned forward. "You've shown tremendous resilience through this whole process, Sarah. More importantly, you've shown leadership. And while the circumstances were not ideal, I believe you've proven yourself here. We want you to take on a bigger role in the company. A leadership position." Sarah's mind raced. A leadership position? It was something she had never imagined for herself, not in the face of everything that had happened. But now, as she looked at David, the weight of his words sank in. "You're offering me the position?" she asked, her voice shaking. David nodded. "Yes. You've earned it. You have the respect of your colleagues. And more importantly, you've shown that you have what it takes to lead. It's time for you to step up." Sarah sat there for a long moment, the words sinking in. She had come so far, too far to let this opportunity slip by. This wasn't just a chance to prove herself to Victor, to the executives, or to her colleagues. This was her chance to shape her future, to define who she was, in this company and in her own life. "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll take it." Sarah's new role was official now. The announcement had come in the form of an email sent to the entire office. She had been promoted to a leadership position, and while the response had been a mix of genuine congratulations and some forced smiles, Sarah knew the truth. Not everyone in the office was thrilled about her promotion, least of all the ones who had once thought her nothing more than a failure. The reality of the promotion was still sinking in. She had earned this, not through favors or by backing down, but through sheer determination and the ability to rise above what others had tried to impose on her. But with this new responsibility came a new weight. She wasn't just a worker anymore, she was a leader, and that meant more pressure. It also meant more enemies. The morning after her promotion, Sarah walked into the office, her back straighter, her posture more confident. She had been through hell, and yet here she was, standing in front of her colleagues, ready to face the new challenge ahead. She had come to EagleTech with big dreams, and now she was beginning to see them come true. Her first order of business was to address the team. She wasn't going to be the kind of leader who simply took the title and waited for others to follow. She was going to set the tone from the start, and it started with a meeting. As she walked into the conference room, Sarah was greeted by a few nods from her colleagues, but she could feel the tension. There were people who were happy for her. Camilla smiled warmly at her, but others still gave her cold stares as if waiting for her to slip up. Victor's absence loomed over the room like a dark cloud. Despite his actions, despite the betrayal, there was no denying that he had once been a force to be reckoned with at EagleTech. Now, he was gone, and the air in the room felt different, less oppressive but also more uncertain. People were looking for leadership, looking for direction, and Sarah had to give it to them. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice strong. "I know some of you might be wondering what happens now. How things will change." She glanced around the room, making eye contact with a few key people. She could see some faces full of anticipation, others hiding uncertainty, and some, the ones who had never thought she would make it this far, looked downright skeptical. "Well," she continued, "there's a lot of work to do, but one thing's for sure. I'm not here to just fill a position. I'm here to work with each and every one of you to make this company better. Together, we can do things that we couldn't before." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'll be transparent with you, I've had my doubts about this place. But I believe in the people here. I believe in us. We're not just cogs in a machine. We are EagleTech, and we can be more than we've ever been." There was a shift in the room. People were paying attention. Sarah could feel it. The tension was still there, but it was giving way to something else, hope maybe, or at least the willingness to give her a chance. "I know that some of you are still skeptical," Sarah continued, "and that's okay. We all have to earn trust. But I promise you, I'm here to listen. I'm here to make things better. And that means doing things differently. No more playing games, no more cutting corners. We'll work hard and we'll succeed together." Sarah didn't expect applause, and she didn't get it. But she did get a few nods, some reluctant but sincere, from the people in the room. And that was enough. As the meeting ended, Sarah stayed behind to chat with Camilla. She was the first one to approach her, a grin on her face. "You did it," Camilla said. "You really did it." Sarah smiled back, but her eyes were focused. "It's just the beginning, but I'm ready for it." As they walked out of the conference room together, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling. that the hardest part was still ahead. Being promoted was one thing. Leading was something else entirely. She was now in charge of a team that had once looked down on her, and while some were beginning to respect her, there were still those who doubted her ability to lead. But Sarah had faced worse challenges. She had faced ridicule, sabotage, and failure, and she had come out the other side stronger. Leading this team would be no different. She was ready. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah quickly settled into her role, meeting with different teams, getting to know the ins and outs of the company's operations, and most importantly, establishing herself as a leader. But there were challenges, unexpected, fierce challenges that reminded her that the battle wasn't over. It was during one of these meetings that the first major test of her leadership came. A crucial project that she had been overseeing hit a major snag. The team had been working on a new software update, one that was supposed to make the company's operations smoother and more efficient. But instead, it had caused problems, serious ones. Sarah felt the weight of the situation pressing on her. The project was on the verge of failure, and the blame would inevitably fall on her shoulders. It wasn't just about the software, it was about the trust people had placed in her. Could she fix this? The answer, Sarah realized, was simple. She would. She called an emergency meeting with her team. No more hiding, no more making excuses. "We've hit a bump," Sarah began, her voice steady. "But we're going to fix it. This isn't just about the software. It's about how we work together. We'll get through this." Her team, who had been visibly frustrated, seemed to respond to her confidence. Slowly, they started brainstorming, offering suggestions. Sarah listened, guided them, and together, they found a solution that salvaged the project. When it was over, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment, but more importantly, she had earned her team's trust. As they walked out of the conference room, Camilla caught up with her, a proud smile on her face. "You did it. You actually did it." Sarah smiled back, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it," she corrected. Camilla nodded. "And that's the difference. You're a leader now. You're not just here to take the blame. You're here to lead us." Sarah's smile grew, and for the first time since her promotion, she felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as something she could carry. The weeks that followed Sarah's first true test as a leader were filled with both triumphs and challenges. The company was watching her closely. The higher-ups were impressed with how she had handled the disaster with the software update, but they were still waiting to see if she could maintain the momentum. The truth was, Sarah felt the pressure more than ever. She was no longer just another analyst. She was now at the helm, responsible not just for the work, but for the people under her charge. And with that came a price. Sarah spent countless hours working late, strategizing with her team, and meeting with executives. She was constantly pulled in different directions, the demands never ceasing. At times it felt like the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. She was constantly aware that one mistake could undo everything she had fought for. It wasn't just the work that was exhausting. It was the loneliness. While she had earned the respect of her team, there were still whispers in the corridors. People who still thought she didn't deserve her place. People who still resented her promotion. People who saw her as a threat. It was one late evening when the truth of that resentment hit her square in the chest. Sarah was sitting at her desk reviewing financial reports when she saw a shadow in the doorway of her cubicle. She looked up, her eyes blinking against the harsh office lights. It was Jacob, the senior engineer who had once been so kind to her. He had always been someone she could rely on, someone who seemed to understand the challenges she faced in a world dominated by Victor's influence. "Jacob," she said, her voice weary. "What's up?" He stepped inside, but there was something different in his expression, something that made Sarah's stomach churn. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. He closed the door behind him, his movements deliberate. Sarah felt a knot form in her throat. What's going on? Jacob hesitated for a moment, and for a brief second, Sarah thought he might be hesitating to deliver some bad news, perhaps a setback in one of the projects she had been overseeing. But then he spoke, his words hitting her like a punch. "There's been talk," he said. "People are unhappy with how things have been going. They think you're too focused on being a leader, not actually leading." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Jacob leaned against the cubicle wall, his eyes avoiding hers. "There are whispers. A lot of people think you're just playing the part. They say you've made mistakes, Sarah. Big ones. And they don't think you're really in control of what's going on with the projects." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Who's saying that?" Jacob hesitated again before answering. "Some of the senior staff, and frankly, a few people from your own team." Sarah felt a rush of heat rise to her face. She had worked so hard to earn her place, to prove herself, and now it felt like it was all being pulled from under her. The doubts that she had tried so hard to banish were creeping back in. She had been doing everything she could, and yet here was Jacob, telling her that she was losing control. "Who exactly?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, but her insides were shaking. "I'm not sure if you want to know," Jacob said, looking away. "But it's happening, and I thought you should hear it from someone you trust." Sarah's mind raced. Who was behind this? Who had the audacity to question her? But the truth was, it didn't matter. This was her battle now, and if she wanted to keep this position, she had to fight for it. Fight against the doubts of those who had once doubted her. "I didn't come here to hurt you, Sarah," Jacob said, his voice soft. "I just thought you should know." Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her again. The loneliness, the pressure, the people waiting for her to fail. But she couldn't back down now. "Thanks for telling me," she said, her voice steady. "I'll handle it." As Jacob left, Sarah sat in her cubicle, the silence in the office feeling more oppressive than it ever had before. She had earned this role. She had fought for it, and now she was going to fight to keep it. The next morning, Sarah called an impromptu meeting with her team. She had to address the rumors, had to show them that she wasn't just going to fold under the pressure. As they gathered around the table, Sarah stood in front of them, her posture strong and her voice clear. "We've had some setbacks recently, but I'm not here to make excuses," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "I know there's been talk, and I need to address it. I'm your leader, and I'm responsible for every project and every decision that comes out of this team. If you're not happy with the direction we're going, now is the time to speak up." She waited, feeling the weight of the moment. The team was silent, but Sarah could see the tension in the air. Finally, Carmen, one of the team leads, spoke up. "I think we've all been feeling the pressure, Sarah," she said, her voice hesitant but sincere. "It's not just you. It's everything. The work is piling up and some of us are worried about the direction things are going. But we trust you. We trust that you'll help us figure it out." Sarah felt a slight relief, but the battle was far from over. There were still those who doubted her ability to lead, still those who didn't think she was ready for this. "I know things have been hard," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But we're in this together. I'm not asking you to trust me because of my title. I'm asking you to trust me because I'm going to work just as hard as each of you. We'll fix this. Together." For the first time since the promotion, Sarah felt the walls around her begin to crack. Her team was starting to believe in her, and though it wasn't a unanimous victory, it was a step in the right direction. She wasn't just the boss anymore. She was their leader, and it was time for her to prove it. What do you think of the story so far? Let me know in the comments. How would you rate it from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned for more exciting stories. Feel free to watch more gripping tales by clicking here on the final screen. The days after the meeting with her team were filled with both quiet victories and subtle challenges. Sarah had seen the shift in the way people regarded her. Her team was beginning to trust her, and that was something she hadn't had just weeks ago. But the whispers in the office, the quiet doubts, still lingered in the background. It was a constant reminder that her position wasn't entirely secure. Not yet. As the week wore on, Sarah's resolve to prove herself grew stronger. She threw herself into her work, tackling every project, every issue, head-on. She wasn't just managing tasks anymore. She was leading the team, making decisions that would affect the direction of Eagle Tech. The responsibility was immense, but Sarah was beginning to feel the weight of it less. Each time she made a decision, each time the team responded positively, it added to her confidence. But that didn't mean it was easy. Far from it. The stress was mounting. The workload had doubled since her promotion, and though Sarah managed to delegate tasks to her team, she often found herself pulling double shifts, staying late into the night. The exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. She would wake up feeling like she hadn't slept at all, the strain of the previous day hanging on her shoulders like an anchor. Yet there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when Sarah felt a sense of pride. She was building something here, something solid. And despite the difficulty, despite the struggle, it was starting to feel like Eagle Tech was becoming her own. One day, as Sarah was heading to her office after a long meeting, she was stopped by Carmen, one of the senior developers on her team. Carmen had been one of the more vocal skeptics at first, but lately, she had been showing more support. "I need to talk to you," Carmen said, her face serious. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What's wrong?" she asked, her mind already running through a dozen scenarios. "It's about the project with the new software update," Carmen said. "There's something you need to know." Sarah's heart skipped. "What's going on?" Carmen glanced around before stepping closer, lowering her voice. "It's about the latest batch of code. I think there's a potential security flaw that could cause serious problems. It's not a small issue. It's big." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you sure?" "I double-checked," Carmen said, "and it's not something that's immediately obvious. But if we don't catch it now, it could create huge issues down the line." Sarah nodded quickly. "Thank you for bringing it to me. I'll get on it right away. Can you make sure the rest of the team knows to pause on this until I get back?" "To them?" Carmen agreed, and Sarah immediately retreated to her office, her mind racing. The weight of what Carmen had said settled heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just about a minor issue. It was a security flaw, something that could jeopardize the company. She knew what this meant. If she didn't fix this now, it could destroy everything she had worked for. With her fingers flying over the keyboard, Sarah dove deep into the code. The hours seemed to blur together, the office around her fading into the background as she worked furiously, dissecting every line, double-checking the changes. She was determined to catch it before anyone else could. At 2 a.m., her exhaustion was starting to get the better of her. She rubbed her eyes, trying to focus. But then, there it was. A tiny line of code, buried beneath several layers of updates. It was a flaw, a vulnerability that had the potential to destroy the entire system. Sarah's pulse quickened as she corrected the issue, her mind sharp despite the fatigue. She saved the work, double-checked it, and sent a message to her team. "Pause all work on the update. I've found the issue. It's fixed." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to lean back in her chair and exhale. She had done it. The problem was fixed. The crisis averted. But as she sat there, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David, one of the senior executives who had been overseeing her transition into leadership. "Sarah, I need to speak with you. Something has come up. Can you come to my office?" The feeling of relief quickly turned into anxiety again. What could this be about? Was it another issue with the team? Something else she had missed? Sarah stood up, trying to shake off the fatigue. She knew she couldn't ignore David's message. She had to face whatever was coming next. David's office was large, the floor-to-ceiling windows giving a breathtaking view of the city skyline. When Sarah entered, She found him seated at his desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up as she walked in, his face unreadable. "Sarah, sit down," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. Sarah sat down slowly, the anxiety creeping up her spine. "What's going on, David?" David didn't immediately answer. He shuffled through the papers on his desk before meeting her gaze. "We've been reviewing the work you've been doing, Sarah, and we've noticed something impressive." Sarah's heart skipped. "Impressive?" David nodded. "You've shown remarkable leadership, more than we expected from someone so new to the role. The way you handled the software update crisis was exemplary. But there's something else." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" David leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "The rumors about you have been dissipating. People are starting to respect you more. But there's still some hesitation among the upper management. They want to see you take on more." Sarah's heart dropped. "More?" she asked cautiously. David's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, more responsibility. You're going to be leading a much bigger project, a high-stakes one. We need someone we can trust, and you're the one we believe in." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle over her. This was it, the moment, where everything could change. She had been climbing for so long, and now she had the chance to prove she was truly ready. "I'll do whatever it takes," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I won't let you down." David gave her a nod, the smallest hint of approval in his eyes. "I know you won't." As Sarah left his office, her mind raced with possibilities. This was the moment that would define her future at Eagle Tech. It wasn't just about being a leader anymore. It was about becoming the kind of leader who could handle whatever came her way. And she was ready for it. The weight of the new responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like an iron cloak. Leading a high-stakes project wasn't just a chance. It was a test. She had worked for years to prove herself, but now, as she sat at her desk reviewing the details of the new initiative, she realized that everything she had done up until this point had led her to this very moment. This project would define her career. The office buzzed around her, a flurry of activity as her team worked diligently on their tasks. The pressure to succeed was palpable, and she could see the quiet skepticism in some of her colleagues' eyes. They still weren't sure if she was truly capable, if she could really lead. She had learned to deal with whispers behind her back before, but this was different. It wasn't just her reputation on the line anymore. It was the company's future. Sarah spent the next few days organizing meetings with her team, setting up clear goals and timelines. Every decision felt monumental. With each passing moment, the magnitude of what she was overseeing weighed more heavily on her. She had been given a chance to lead, and she couldn't afford to fail. But as the project unfolded, challenges appeared faster than she could handle them. It wasn't just the technical issues, they were manageable. It was the constant battles she faced with the other department heads, the ones who didn't believe in her vision. They doubted her ideas, questioned her decisions, and made it clear that they didn't think a newcomer like her could lead the project successfully. Sarah sat in a meeting with one of the senior engineers, Dylan, a man who had been at Eagle Tech for years and had a reputation for being difficult to work with. His arms were crossed as he looked at her, his tone condescending. "We can't just throw in some new features and expect the system to run smoothly," Dylan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're asking us to go beyond what the team is capable of, and frankly, I don't think you understand the scale of the problem." Sarah fought to keep her composure. She wasn't going to let Dylan's arrogance shake her. "I understand the complexity of the project," she said evenly. "But we're here to find solutions, not to focus on the things that can't be done. The entire team is capable of this, if we work together." Dylan snorted. "You'll see," he muttered, standing up to leave. "You'll see how far that gets you." Sarah watched him leave, the sting of his words lingering in the air. The meeting ended, but Sarah's mind raced. Dylan's attitude wasn't the only issue. There were others like him, People who saw her as an outsider, as someone who didn't have the right to lead them. The rest of the afternoon dragged on, Sarah trying to refocus, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Dylan's skepticism was just the tip of the iceberg. She was fighting a battle on all fronts. That evening, as she walked back to her office, she noticed Camilla standing by the door. She had been Sarah's ally since the beginning, and Sarah was grateful for her quiet support. Camilla had always been the voice of reason when things got tough. "Hey, you okay?" Camilla asked, her concern evident. Sarah sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't know. It's like I'm fighting on all sides. There are still so many people who don't believe in me, Camilla. Dylan's right. I might not be able to pull this off." Camilla shook her head, her eyes fierce. "You're not going to fail, Sarah. You've come too far to let someone like Dylan get in your head. The team believes in you, and I do too. You've proven yourself time and time again. You can do this." Sarah felt a spark of gratitude. Camilla was right. She had already proven herself once. But this wasn't about proving something to Victor, to Dylan, or to anyone else. This was about proving it to herself. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." "Camilla," Sarah admitted. "The pressure, it's too much." Camilla's gaze softened. "You don't have to do it alone. We're all in this together." Sarah looked at her for a moment, a wave of emotion overwhelming her. She had spent so long trying to prove herself that she had forgotten the power of relying on others. The burden didn't have to be hers to carry alone. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the words feeling heavier than she had intended. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "You're stronger than you think," Camilla said, giving her a supportive smile. "You've already overcome so much. Don't let the fear of failure stop you." With Camilla's words echoing in her mind, Sarah knew she couldn't let the pressure break her. She wasn't in this alone. The following days felt like a whirlwind. Sarah threw herself into her work even more, taking Camilla's words to heart. She was no longer afraid of making mistakes. She was focused on moving forward, finding solutions, and, most importantly, not letting the doubts of others affect her. And slowly, something began to shift. The team began to rally behind her. Dylan, for all his skepticism, began to see that Sarah's ideas were worth listening to. Her leadership wasn't about being perfect, it was about guiding the team through the obstacles and working together to find solutions. By the end of the week, Sarah's confidence had grown. The project was moving forward. The pieces were falling into place. And for the first time, she felt like she had earned her place as a leader. The doubts still lingered, but she had learned how to push them aside. When Sarah finally left the office that Friday evening, her body was exhausted, but her mind was clear. She had faced down her biggest challenges yet, and she had come out on top. The hardest part was over. Sarah stood before the team, watching them prepare for the final stages of the project. The atmosphere in the office was different now. There was a palpable sense of camaraderie that had been absent just a few weeks ago. People were working together, their energy focused on the task at hand. And for the first time, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. It hadn't been easy. The obstacles had been plenty. From Dylan's skepticism to the late-night crises, the sabotage, and the overwhelming pressure to prove herself. It felt like she had been constantly fighting an uphill battle. But now, as the project neared its final stages, Sarah could see the fruits of her labor beginning to take shape. Her team was more confident, and their respect for her leadership had solidified. They were no longer just following her orders. They were working with her, collaborating, and giving their best. Sarah had earned their trust. But that wasn't the only thing that had changed. She had changed too. The fierce self-doubt that had haunted her for so long had faded. Every setback, every challenge had only made her stronger. And now, as she stood on the cusp of the final test, the presentation to the board of directors, she knew that no matter the outcome, she had already won. Sarah had come into Eagle Tech unsure of herself, unsure if she had the skills, the strength, the tenacity to lead. But now, she had earned her place. The day of the final presentation arrived, and the stakes were higher than ever. Sarah stood at the front of the room, her team gathered around her, each one poised to deliver their part. The board of directors sat at the table, their expressions unreadable. Victor's absence was almost palpable, and yet, his shadow still lingered in the room. His influence still hung over the company, and some members of the board were still skeptical of Sarah's ability to lead. But Sarah wasn't fazed. She wasn't there to prove anything to anyone else anymore. She was there to show the board what her team could do, to show them that she had the vision, the strategy, and the leadership to take EagleTech to the next level. Her voice was steady as she began. Good morning, everyone. Today we're presenting the final phase of the software project we've been working on for the past few months. The updates we've implemented will not only increase efficiency, but also ensure the long-term security and scalability of our systems. The work we've done will help propel EagleTech into the next era of technological innovation. She paused, her eyes sweeping over the faces of the board members. Some were nodding, others were taking notes, but she could see the skepticism in their eyes. She knew what they were thinking. Can she really pull this off? Is this just another failure waiting to happen? But she couldn't let that get to her. She had already proven herself in ways that words couldn't describe. She wasn't going to let their doubts stop her from finishing what she had started. One by one, her team members took the floor, each presenting their contributions to the project. From security updates to new features that would enhance usability, they showcased everything they had worked on. Sarah had guided them through the rough patches, encouraged them when they faltered, and now it was clear that their hard work had paid off. The final presentation was hers. Taking a deep breath, Sarah moved to the screen, clicking through the slides that detailed their successes. As she explained the final updates to the software, she could feel the room's energy shift. The board members who had been distant at the start were now fully engaged. They were listening. They were invested. Sarah finished the presentation, her hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. In conclusion, she said, her voice clear, this project isn't just a success, it's a testament to the hard work of everyone here at EagleTech. We've overcome challenges, faced setbacks, but we've come out stronger, and I believe that, moving forward, we're ready for anything. She clicked the final slide, showing a graph of projected growth and potential new markets the company could tap into with the new software. The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly the board members began to nod, their expressions softening. David, the senior executive who had mentored her since the beginning, was the first to speak. Well done, Sarah. Well done, everyone. This is exactly the kind of leadership we need at EagleTech moving forward. You've exceeded our expectations. Sarah's heart soared. This was it. This was the moment she had worked so hard for. The validation she had craved for so long wasn't coming from Victor, wasn't coming from anyone who had doubted her. It was coming from the people who mattered the most now, her team, and the people who saw her for who she truly was, capable, driven, and ready to lead. As the meeting wrapped up, the board members filed out of the room, leaving Sarah and her team alone. They looked at her with pride, their eyes shining with respect. You did it, Sarah, Camilla said, her voice full of admiration. We did it. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. We did. We all did. And in that moment, Sarah knew that she wasn't just a leader because of her title. She was a leader because she had earned it. She had fought for it, and she had proven that she could lead no matter the obstacles in her way. Sarah stood in the quiet of her office, her eyes drifting over the cityscape outside. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the skyline, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of peace. It had been a long road to get here, full of challenges, doubt, and relentless pressure. But as she watched the city below, she realized that she had earned every step of it. The presentation had been a success. The board had approved the project, and not just that. Sarah had received the kind of recognition she had never expected. Her hard work, her leadership had paid off. The team was on track, and the company was moving in the right direction. The shadow of Victor had finally been lifted from Eagle Tech, and Sarah was free to lead without the constant fear of being undermined. But even more than the approval or the recognition, Sarah felt something deeper. She felt whole. All the pieces of the puzzle that had once seemed so scattered, her self-doubt, her fears, her past struggles were finally coming together. She wasn't just the woman who had been given a chance to lead. She was the woman who had taken that chance and made something of it. She had become the leader she had always dreamed of being, not because of a title, but because she had found her strength, her voice, her purpose. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She turned to find Camilla standing in the doorway, her face lit with a proud smile. "You did it," Camilla said softly, stepping inside. "I knew you could. I've been telling everyone that you would be the one to turn this company around." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "It was all of us. Without the team, none of this would have happened." Camilla nodded. "I know. But you gave us a reason to believe. You gave us confidence, and that's something I haven't seen here before." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "I don't know what to say, Camilla." "You don't have to say anything," Camilla said, walking over to Sarah's desk and sitting down across from her. "You've already said everything you needed to, with your actions." Sarah's gaze lingered on Camilla, and she realized just how much this woman had meant to her. Camilla had been her ally, her rock, through all of this. They had fought together, and in many ways, Camilla had helped her become the leader she was. "Today, I couldn't have done this without you," Sarah said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Camilla shrugged. "We all had a role to play, but you were the one who took the lead." There was a long pause as Sarah let her words sink in. It wasn't just the work that mattered, it was the relationships, the trust, the shared vision. And in that moment, Sarah knew she had everything she needed to succeed. Not just the title or the projects, but the support of those who believed in her. As the night drew on and the office began to empty, Sarah sat back in her chair, reflecting on how far she had come. The road had been long, filled with obstacles and challenges, but every step had led her here. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into Eagle Tech uncertain and unsure of herself. She had transformed, grown, and emerged stronger than she ever thought possible. But even with all the success, the recognition, and the validation, Sarah knew there was still work to do. This was just the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, more projects to lead, and more hurdles to overcome. And that was okay. Because Sarah had learned the most important lesson of all. She was capable of handling whatever came her way. The future was bright. And for the first time, Sarah truly believed that she was ready for it.